By the way, we're getting more wins from the Supreme Court. There's a big win just came out, totally separate from the abortion issue. This was on the First Amendment. There was a case in Boston over at the Boston City Hall. There are multiple flagpoles that are standing there, and one of the flagpoles is open to fly various flags that the community wants to put up. And so they put all sorts of flags up there. And a Christian group wanted to fly a flag, and Boston City Hall said, absolutely not, you can't do that. The Supreme Court just ruled that that was a violation of the Christian group's First Amendment rights. The city had already approved more than 280 flag raisings over a dozen years. They only rejected one, and that was Camp Constitution's Christian flag. So this was a unanimous Supreme Court decision. Even the libs went on with this and said, no, you can't just single out the Christians and say that you don't get speech, but every other group in the country does get speech. This was a really good opinion, and actually Justice Stephen Breyer, who's a liberal justice on the court, he even got a snarky little comment in there about how ugly Boston City Hall is. So he said that the flagpole at issue stands at the entrance of Boston City Hall, built in the late 1960s. Boston City Hall is a raw concrete structure, an example of the brutalist style. Critics of the day heralded it as a public building that articulates its functions with strength, dignity, grace, and even glamour. The design has since proved somewhat more controversial. See Boston City Hall named world's ugliest building. Which is true. It is one of the ugliest buildings in the world. So this was, generally speaking, a wonderful decision for conservatives, for Christians. And yet I knew, even as I read this, I knew, putting my little Nostradamus hat on, taking out my crystal ball, I knew this is going to be used by the Satanists. And not 2 days later, the Satanists come out and they say that they want to raise their flag at City Hall. And the leader, or the co-founder of the Satanic Temple, says religious liberty is a bedrock principle in a democracy, and religious liberty is dependent upon government viewpoint neutrality. Therefore, we want to raise the Satanic flag over City Hall. This is going to split people, even on the right. The hardcore libertarian types are probably going to say, yeah, let the Satanists raise their flag. Viewpoint neutrality, man. And the conservative people are going to say, no, we're not going to tolerate Satanist flags flying above City Hall. So who's right? Well, according to the principle that the Satanist articulated, any flag should fly, right? He said that we need viewpoint neutrality. The government cannot have any views on any matter whatsoever. It's the same thing that Anna Kasparian was articulating at the top of the show. I hate Christianity and I'm not a Christian, but you can have your Christianity, just don't impose it on me, she says, as she's imposing her views on us. That's the Satanist position, viewpoint neutrality. Conservatives know there's no such thing as neutrality. First of all, here's a little history check. Here's a good rule of thumb. What would Washington do? What would the Founding Fathers do? What would the men who built our country do? Do you think they would exalt the raising of a satanic flag as the high point of the blessing of liberty? No, I don't think so. I think they would run the Satanists out of town on a rail, and they would probably deport them from the country. So no. So what happened? How did we end up in this spot? Well, the view that this guy articulated, viewpoint neutrality, comes in recent years from a 1995 Supreme Court case, Rosenberg versus Rectors and Visitors of the University of Virginia. This case is really the beginning of our national obsession with viewpoint neutrality. And conservatives and Christians have really embraced this idea of viewpoint neutrality because at the moment it's protecting religious people, or it seems to be protecting religious people from the predations of an atheist culture. But it's a silly idea. Of course there's no neutrality. Of course a political community has the right and the obligation to say that some things are good and some things are bad. Every political community in the history of the world has held some things sacred and held other things taboo. There's no avoiding that. We can bury our heads in the sand and pretend otherwise, but that's not the case. We have sacred images today. Unfortunately, the sacred images in our country are the pride flag. The sacred images are the face of George Floyd, the sacred images, but we have them, and we have a whole liturgical calendar. We have a culture, and we have ultimately religious views that must be held because all politics ultimately comes down to religion, whether Anna Kasparian or the head of the Satanic Temple want to admit it or not, okay? When you look at our culture all around us, you'll notice that it is reflecting everything except for what we believe. So it's time to build our own culture. I'm glad you liked that clip. Now, ring the bell, subscribe, get all those notifications. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your audio podcasts. Subscribe to The Michael Knowles Show. We'll see you next time.